The World This Week. Politics.
A new supreme leader was appointed in Iran, Mojtaba Khamenei, the hardline son of the slain Ali Khamenei. Mr. Khamenei wasn't seen or heard of for days after the announcement. Donald Trump was not happy with the choice, suggesting the new leader's tenure would be short. 3 vessels were hit in the Strait of Hormuz on March 11th and another 3 early on March 12th. America sank 16 Iranian mine-laying ships. Massive Israeli and American airstrikes continued on Iran. After oil facilities in Tehran were attacked, the World Health Organization backed advice for the city's inhabitants to stay indoors to avoid breathing in toxic oil-laden air. Nearly 1,300 civilians have been killed in the conflict. Mr. Trump and Pete Hegseth, his Secretary of War, seemed to be reading from different scripts in their pronouncements about how long the conflict would last. The president tried to reassure markets that military action is very complete, whereas Mr. Hegseth said this is only just the beginning. Polling shows that most Americans are opposed to the war, a different situation from the start of previous conflicts such as Iraq. On a visit to Cyprus, Emmanuel Macron announced that he would deploy 12 naval vessels, including an aircraft carrier strike group, to the Mediterranean and Red Sea to help defend countries from Iranian attacks. When Cyprus is attacked, then Europe is attacked, the French president said, as he raised the possibility of sending French ships to the Strait of Hormuz on a purely escort mission. Britain has struggled to send one ship, a destroyer, to Cyprus, even though Iran has targeted British military bases on the island. On hearing that Britain was thinking of sending aircraft carriers, Mr. Trump said it would have been nice to have them 2 weeks ago, but we don't need them any longer. Israel intensified its strikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, expanding them to central Beirut. Nearly 700,000 people are thought to have been displaced by the renewed attacks. The Israeli government warned Iranian government representatives in Lebanon to leave immediately before they are targeted. Iran provides material support to Hezbollah. A drone strike on Goma, a city in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, was a reminder that conflict in the region continues. Goma has been under the control of M23, a rebel group backed by Rwanda, since January 2025. Multiple people, including a French aid worker, were killed in the strike, which M23 blamed on Congo's army. A new report from Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab found that the Rapid Support Forces, one of the main parties in Sudan's civil war, systematically destroyed fields and farming villages around El Fasher in Darfur. The findings support UN allegations that the group committed genocide in the city, which it took in October 2025. Tens of thousands of its residents are thought to have been killed in the assault. The United States re-established diplomatic and consular relations with Venezuela 2 months after removing Nicolas Maduro as president and taking him to New York to await trial on drug trafficking charges. America closed its embassy in Caracas in 2019. The leftist regime remains in power, but has been working closely with America to open up investment in its oil industry. The country's parliament has also initially approved a law that allows foreign and private companies to invest in mining. Senate Republicans plan to hold a confirmation hearing in mid-March for Mr. Trump's new pick to head the Department of Homeland Security. The president nominated Mark Wayne Mullin for the job after sacking Kristi Noem, who has been criticized for her handling of the immigration crackdown in Minnesota and subsequent protests in which 2 people died. Mr. Trump fell out with her over the $220 million she spent on an ad campaign. Mr. Mullin is a senator from Oklahoma. The Greens narrowly won re-election in Baden-Württemberg, Germany's 3rd most populous state, which includes the city of Stuttgart. The Christian Democrats, the leading party in the federal government, came a close second. The populist right Alternative for Germany, or AfD, doubled its share of the vote to come 3rd. It was the first of 8 state and local elections taking place this year. The AfD hopes to win more votes than the Christian Democrats in some of them and become the largest party on the right. Hungary's already strained relations with Ukraine worsened when Viktor Orban, Hungary's prime minister, confiscated a shipment of Ukrainian gold and cash. The shipment was travelling from Austria through Hungary to Kiev when it was seized by Hungarian forces. Mr. Orban claims the gold and cash may have a criminal link, including to political organisations, seen by some as an attempt to smear his election rivals. Ukraine says the shipment was just a transfer between banks. Britain's ruling Labour Party released a report aimed at enhancing social cohesion. Entitled Protecting What Matters, it presented policies for tackling extremism and safeguarding people from discrimination while drawing the country together. But the report caused divisions, most notably over a controversial definition of anti-Muslim hostility that critics think could restrict people's freedom to criticise Islam. In Nepal, the Rashtriya Swatantra Party looked likely to gain a supermajority in parliament following an election. The Progressive and Economically Liberal Party is led by Balendra Shah, who stepped down as mayor of Kathmandu in January. The former rapper was a figurehead for the opposition in last September's student-led riots, in which scores of people died and the Prime Minister resigned. That same youth-focused Gen Z movement has now swept him to office, breaking the established party's lock on power. Rail services resumed between Beijing and Pyongyang for the first time since the COVID-19 pandemic forced them to stop in 2020. The first train between the Chinese and North Korean capitals was sold out, though officials, the media and businessmen were able to secure tickets. North Korea remains closed to foreigners apart from some Russian and Chinese tour groups. Next month's Pyongyang Marathon has been cancelled. Last year, foreign runners competed in the carefully staged event, which ends with a lap of a stadium packed with cheering supporters of the North Korean regime.
The World This Week. Business.
The International Energy Agency coordinated the emergency release of 400 million barrels of oil among member countries. It hoped this would alleviate concerns of an oil crunch following the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which some 19 million barrels of crude and refined products normally pass a day. The price of Brent crude nonetheless rose as vessels were hit in the strait. It is now trading around 30% higher than before hostilities began. The price continues to gyrate. Donald Trump suggested the war was very complete, yet hostilities have continued. Other energy prices have also surged. Dutch TTF, the European benchmark for natural gas, is up by more than 60% since the war started on February 28th. The global shock to energy prices is having a big impact in Asia, which relies on oil and gas imports from the Gulf. With fuel prices rocketing, Vietnam encouraged people to work from home to reduce travel. The government in Thailand ordered civil servants to conserve energy in public buildings and is considering whether to compel private businesses to do the same. Bangladesh told universities to close early for a holiday. Daily limits have been imposed on fuel sales there. In India, Reliance Industries said it would maximise production of liquefied petroleum gas at its refining hub in Jamnagar, the world's largest, and work with the government to ensure uninterrupted access to essential fuels for Indian households. Meanwhile, Donald Trump announced that Reliance would back a project to build a new oil refinery in Brownsville, Texas. Airline stocks took a battering as investors bet that profits will be all but wiped out by higher fuel costs. Several carriers, including Air India, Air New Zealand and Qantas, raised their ticket prices or said they would consider doing so. Air New Zealand suspended its annual earnings forecast because of the market volatility. Defying American tariffs, China's exports rose by 21.8% in January and February year-on-year, blowing past market expectations. Imports were up by 19.8%. Chinese manufacturers have turned to other markets to offset a decline in trade with the US. Exports to Europe increased by 27.8%, to South Korea by 27%, and Southeast Asia by 29.4%. Meanwhile, China's annual inflation rate stood at 1.3% in February, the highest in 3 years. America's Consumer Price Index rose by 2.4% in February at an annual rate, unchanged from January. Energy prices increased by just 0.5%, and petrol prices fell by 5.6%. They are expected to jump in the next inflation report as higher energy costs feed through. Separately, employers unexpectedly shed 92,000 jobs in February, underlining concerns about the weakness of the labour market. The data also showed that since reaching a peak in October 2024, federal government employment has fallen by 330,000, or 11%. Anthropic went to court to try to overturn the Pentagon's designation of the startup as a supply chain risk, which means its products cannot be used by the Pentagon nor by suppliers in their direct work with it. The designation came after Anthropic insisted on safeguards for use in certain situations, such as surveillance. Our military will obey the United States Constitution, not any woke AI company's terms of service, said the White House. Anthropic says the designation could hamper its ability to raise funds. Oracle's latest earnings pleased investors. Revenue surged in its recent quarter, and the company forecast that it will comfortably meet and likely exceed its sales forecast for next year and beyond, thanks to demand for its software from AI data centers. Its spending on AI, which spooked markets late last year, rose sharply in the quarter, but it stuck with a forecast of $50 billion in capital expenditures for the whole year. Battling American tariffs and falling sales in China, Volkswagen's operating profit fell by half in 2025. The carmaker is now cutting 50,000 jobs in Germany by 2030, up from the 35,000 it had agreed to with unions in December 2024. Research published in the Harvard Business Review suggested that workers are suffering mental fatigue from excessive use or oversight of AI tools beyond their cognitive capacity. The researchers termed this as AI brain fry, usually the result of using too many AI tools at once and for complex projects. When AI is used to reduce routine tasks, worker burnout is much lower, the survey found. The professions reporting the most AI brain fry were marketing and human resources. Those reporting the least were legal services and management.
Leaders.
An attack on the world economy. Whatever happens in the Strait of Hormuz, energy markets have been changed forever.
Having discovered the costs of tariffs, President Donald Trump has now discovered the costs of war. On March 9th, he declared that his campaign against Iran would be over very soon, sending oil prices, which had peaked at nearly $120 a barrel the day before, crashing to nearly $80. Before the war, they had been $70. Iran's de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz has blocked roughly 15% of global oil supply. Mr. Trump, facing mid-term elections and voters weary of inflation, is signalling that he cannot bear those costs, just as he retreated from his trade war after markets buckled last spring. Yet Mr. Trump is as chaotic in matters of war and peace as he is in economic policy. As we published this, the strait remained all but closed after Iran had struck shipping there. The oil price had rebounded to around $100. Meanwhile, American rhetoric remained belligerent as Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, promised to fight on harder than ever. The confusion betrays the president's lack of good options. Whereas de-escalating the trade war is more or less in his gift, he cannot restore the old energy market. Whatever happens, the world is entering a new era of energy insecurity. The shock the war has unleashed could be huge. True, the world depends less on oil than it did in 1973, when an Arab embargo caused crude prices to quadruple, or 1979 to 80, when the Iranian Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War hit supply. Then it was still common to burn oil to produce electricity. Today it is used less widely, mainly to power transport and make petrochemicals. Yet this evolution is double-edged. Today's oil demand is stubborn, so prices have to rise more for a given disruption of supply. And this one is extreme. The loss of supply is greater than in either 1970s shock. Even at the worst moments of the crisis, traders have not come close to pricing in an indefinite closure of the strait. The oil price required to bring demand into line with supply in such a scenario could be over $150 per barrel. Members of the International Energy Agency can draw on 1.8 billion barrels of emergency stocks, and they are releasing 400 million. But access is often throttled by pipelines or other constraints. Even China, which has built up a separate vast stockpile, has seen the need to stop exports of some refined products. The fact that transport is a key input to so much of the world economy means that bottlenecks could cause grave harm. And the shock is not limited to oil. Qatar's main liquefied natural gas, or LNG, export facility remains closed after a drone strike, taking nearly a fifth of global supply off the market. An expansion of its output has also been postponed. The loss of Qatar's exports has set off a scramble in Asia. In Europe, where gas storage tanks are unusually empty for the time of year, prices are up by more than half. America could export more LNG, but its demand for natural gas is rising because of the boom in energy-hungry data centers. Iran could drag the war out to try to suggest that it, and not Uncle Sam, is calling the shots. On March 11th, Iran hit 3 cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz and, later, 2 tankers near Iraq. Like Yemen's Houthi rebels, who have successfully attacked shipping in the Red Sea with low-tech weaponry despite NATO members' high-tech efforts to stop it, the Iranian regime has learned that it can lob drones at ships and energy infrastructure while being flattened by bombs. Even when the war ends, the world will have changed. Iran's new hardline supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, now knows that energy prices are America's weak spot. In Ukraine, which has tested drone defenses, some Iranian-style machines still get through. American troops are not about to occupy Iran to stop the launches. America does not have the capacity to defend every tanker, even if it provides them with cheap insurance. Disruption to energy markets will therefore come and go with geopolitical tensions, especially if Iran concludes that it needs a nuclear weapon to be safe. That is the new reality in which investors, businesses and policymakers must now operate. For investors, the contrast between an increasingly volatile world and buoyant equity markets just became more stark. Chaos in the Middle East joins a long list of threats to markets, including gloomy scenarios related to artificial intelligence, trouble in private credit, and a loss of faith in indebted governments. Government bond yields have risen since the crisis began, especially in southern Europe and Britain, which depends on imported LNG. Businesses face a new risk premium, as energy prices reflect the ever-present danger of conflagration. As after the pandemic and start of the Ukraine war, they must again pore over their supply chain risks, including their exposure to the Gulf economies, whose reputations for stability have been shaken and which can expect less investment and fewer tourists. For policymakers, painful decisions loom. Energy storage is part of the solution. It was foolish of Mr. Trump not to replenish America's oil reserves at the low prices that prevailed before the war. Adding to emergency stocks will now cost more. High prices should induce more supply outside the Middle East. Until it does, countries like America may find it hard to resist the lure of energy protectionism. When oil producers and refiners, including China and India, start to restrict exports in an attempt to protect their consumers from high prices, the damage to other countries can be severe. Central banks will have to cope with a renewed inflationary threat that heightens the risk of both recession and wage price spirals. And politicians will face voters clamouring for energy subsidies, like the support doled out in the rich world after Russia invaded Ukraine, which exceeded 2.5% of GDP in many European countries, adding to their debts. That would shift the pain to poorer countries, especially in Asia. In 2022, Bangladesh endured blackouts. It is difficult to predict how this crisis ends. But even if countries get policy right, it is already clear that the war has made the world economy less prosperous, more volatile, and harder to govern.
Leaders.
China's new dynasties. A hereditary elite is taking shape. The Communist Party is afraid to tax its wealth.
Over the past half-century, China has conjured vast wealth out of widespread poverty. Now comes the vexing part, how to pass it on to the next generation. For China, this poses a new and underappreciated risk. On its current trajectory, the first great intergenerational transfer in China's modern history will widen inequality, cement privilege, and breed resentment. The government, devoted to common prosperity, is shockingly insouciant about what that will mean. In 1978, on the eve of China's economic takeoff, the average household's assets were worth barely $1,500 in today's money. Now that figure has reached about $170,000, a 100-fold real increase. Alas, the fruits are uneven. The richest 10% of the population now owns nearly 70% of China's total private wealth, roughly equal with America and well above most advanced economies, according to the World Inequality Database. And the richest 10% are, like most of China, rapidly aging. Their heirs are in line for windfalls. Across the rich world, increasing hereditary wealth is creating a class more inclined to search out tax loopholes than to strive or innovate. China will have those problems, and more. First, its inheritocracy is brand new. It was only in the 1990s, when China allowed home ownership, that people started to accumulate a lot of assets. A business boom got going at the same time, minting millions of millionaires and hundreds of billionaires. Of those worth at least 5 billion yuan, that's $720 million, 23% were over 60 in 2016. Today, 49% are that old. Another uniquely Chinese feature is society's demographic structure. Although some ultra-rich families flouted the government's one-child policy, most urban dwellers abided by it. The assets of two parents are thus about to go to a single heir. New clubs and matchmakers have sprung up to help the richest couple with each other, magnifying their inherited advantage. And a last factor in slowing economic growth, even as wage gaps have narrowed slightly, wealth is starting to matter more. This represents an abrupt transition for China from an era when people believed anyone could prosper through hard work to a bleaker acceptance that what really counts is the right amniotic fluid, as one person quips in our briefing this week. Meanwhile, steep declines in property prices have hurt almost all middle-class Chinese, for whom housing was their biggest asset. The uber-wealthy with more diversified portfolios have emerged in better shape. The most severe consequence may be a new fault line in society. For years, Chinese people were inveterate optimists, believing in the fundamental fairness of life, even when the poorest faced long odds. Recent surveys have shown a marked rise in pessimism, and given the difficulties of monitoring public opinion in China, they may be understating that trend. One concern for the government is social instability, though it has tools to suppress unrest. Another is that young adults may choose to withdraw from the rat race or sit back on their wealth. With youth unemployment over 16%, some are questioning the endless competition that can make life in China so stressful. As the great inheritance plays out, the go-getter spirit that fueled the country's rise may ebb. Persistent inequality will also add to economic imbalances. The tendency of the well-off to spend less of their income than the poor helps explain China's low consumption rate. Despite President Xi Jinping's talk of greater equality, official thinking is woefully behind the curve on inheritance. The Communist Party, bizarre as it might sound, is opposed to a significant redistribution of wealth. It has a Thatcherite moral objection to handouts, worrying that they will make people lazy. It would instead prefer strong economic growth, whereby gains are more evenly shared. But ignoring accumulated wealth will ensure that deep inequality becomes ingrained. The solution need not be radical. China should focus on taxing capital, a glaring hole in today's fiscal system. It has neither an inheritance tax nor a recurring property tax, and its capital gains tax is riddled with exemptions. Its income tax is also hobbled by complexity. Combined with cuts to consumption levies, the result is that China's total tax revenue, excluding Social Security contributions, has declined over the past decade from 18% to 13% of GDP, about three-quarters the rate of peer countries. Observers fret that Mr. Xi is returning China to Marxism. Few notice that, perhaps unwittingly, he has made it a partial tax haven. Since the early 1990s, China has often promised to consider introducing an inheritance tax, yet has not done so. It has also moved at a glacial pace on levying a property tax. Why the delay? Some officials cite the fear that taxes may weigh on growth, and that the wealthy may shift their fortunes abroad. Neither argument is persuasive. If inequality keeps rising, it can damage growth too, and China is well placed to stop an exodus of wealth with strict capital controls. A more compelling explanation is that the Communist Party fears the political fallout. Taxing wealth requires assets to be reported. This has bedeviled the launch of a property tax, in part because many corrupt officials own several homes. Forcing political elites to come clean would expose pervasive graft and trigger a preemptive wave of home sales when the property market is weak. Beyond officialdom, there is a need to justify higher taxes to the public, particularly to the rich who stand to lose the most. Mr. Xi's inaction on taxes is a reminder that for all his power, he is still wary of stirring up resistance. China's leaders, sometimes celebrated for their technocratic brilliance, have consistently been slow to correct obvious mistakes. They were too hesitant to end the one-child policy, to deflate the property bubble, and to retreat from their zero-COVID strategy. Once again, they face a slow-moving but easily visible problem, the transfer of vast riches. The danger is that they wake up in a decade or two to see that they have nurtured a permanently wealthy elite on top of a disillusioned society.
Leaders.
Iran's nuclear program. No good options. If America cannot eliminate the nuclear threat from Iran, what should it do?
Many things make the Iranian regime loathsome, but what causes it to be especially dangerous is its pursuit of nuclear weapons. Its promise not to build a bomb was belied by its determination to enrich uranium to weapons grade. That has long underpinned the regime's attempts to intimidate its neighbours and threaten Israel's survival. If the war unleashed by America and Israel on February 28th is to count as even a narrow success, it must therefore set back Iran's nuclear ambitions for years, and ideally forever. The best way for this to happen would be for the regime to be replaced by a democracy focused on improving the lot of its people and living in peace with its neighbours. Such a government would pose the least threat. Yet an aerial war will struggle to create such a renewal. It could even make the situation worse. The regime has surely understood that being a threshold power makes you a target, and that for a nuclear program to offer any protection, it must go all the way. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is thought to be more eager than his late father and predecessor to get a bomb, and after the death of his family is likely to want vengeance. In Iran, those arguments may overshadow the fact that American and Israeli missiles and bombs have done great damage to the economy. Despite knowing that future work on a nuke will be met with extraordinary firepower, Mr. Khamenei may tolerate the risk. Post-war, Iran would begin a program with a head start. Roughly 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium is buried inside the country, enough for about 10 bombs. Whether in the hands of a hostile regime or, if order collapses, a warlord looking for a buyer, this fissile material poses a grave threat. America has three options. One, backed by some in Israel, is to send in special forces to seize it. As we describe, that would take a huge days-long occupation involving a specialist assault force protected by over 1,000 troops and constant air support. This is feasible, though demanding and risky, but America has lost the element of surprise, and intelligence suggests that the 400 kilograms is in 2 or even 3 places, possibly putting some of it out of reach. Furthermore, although Iran would have to restart enrichment from scratch, it would retain its know-how. That leads to a second option, which is to bomb Iran every time it poses a threat. This war has shown how costly that would be. Iran has learned that even its low-tech drones and missiles can roil world energy markets and disrupt the Gulf states, which sell themselves to investors and expats as oases of calm. American voters would surely reject going to war if each engagement only reset the clock for the next one. American strategists would not want to be stuck in the Middle East when their focus is China. That leaves a deal with the regime to end its nuclear threat. This is a tough option. Mr. Khamenei may reject an agreement. The regime may accept and then go on to cheat, and yet it is still the best option. Iran is exhausted after the bombing. To rebuild its economy, it needs sanctions to be lifted. In exchange, it may be willing to strike a permanent deal as part of a ceasefire, whereby the regime agrees to the end of enrichment, monitoring of its nuclear program, and the dilution or removal of the highly enriched uranium. It would be an odious compromise. In 2015, Barack Obama negotiated a similar temporary deal, but Donald Trump abrogated it in 2018. What an indictment of his Iran policy that 8 years and 2 wars later, he has no better options.
Leaders.
America's midterm elections. How to teach Donald Trump a Latin lesson. By alienating Hispanics, the president has given Democrats an open goal.
Hispanics love Trump. said Donald Trump in 2024. It was not just empty boasting. He won 48% of the Latino vote that year, more than any previous Republican presidential candidate. Like many others, Hispanics were feeling squeezed by inflation and largely blamed it on President Joe Biden. Many chafed at disorder on the border where, for a while, a wide-open asylum system had attracted an influx of people from poorer countries. Mr. Trump promised to cut the cost of living and kick out migrants who had committed crimes. Lots of Latinos took him at his word and now feel buyer's remorse. Far from taming prices, Mr. Trump is driving them higher with tariffs and a war of choice in Iran. And far from concentrating on deporting rapists and gangsters, his agents have been rounding up grannies and gardeners. Texan builders are struggling to build houses because Latino bricklayers and electricians are frightened to come to work. Federal agents are barging into private property without judicial warrants. Hispanics feel besieged by swaggering men in masks. Small wonder Mr. Trump's approval rating among them has collapsed to 22%. That will make it harder for Republicans to hold on to Congress at the midterm elections in November. Their gerrymandering in places like Texas, which assumed that their Latino support would remain high, could backfire. Nationwide, if the election is close, a Hispanic surge could tip dozens of seats. A new Economist YouGov poll finds that Latinos favor Democratic candidates over Republicans by 43% to 27%. In the past 6 months, the prediction market odds of Democrats flipping the House of Representatives have improved from 69% to 85%. For the Senate, where only a third of seats are up for election, the odds have risen from 29% to 47%. The loss of Hispanic support is not the only reason why Republicans face a possible drubbing. Plenty of other Americans are hacked off with high prices and ICE agents who act like a lawless paramilitary force. Still, history suggests that when a party alienates a whole demographic group, the political effects linger. Republican presidential candidates won California 9 times out of 10 between 1952 and 1988, but never carried it again after a Republican governor backed a statewide anti-immigration referendum in 1994. The administration knows it has a problem and has been trying to soften its tone. Kristi Noem, who once posed triumphantly in front of a cage of half-naked Hispanic men, no longer heads the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. Recruitment ads for ICE agents no longer appeal so directly to macho xenophobes. The DHS website once declared that America has been invaded by criminals and predators. We need you to get them out. Now it appeals for protectors and even analytical types. The White House has told Republicans in Congress to stop talking about mass deportation and emphasize the removal of criminals. Yet the underlying policy has not changed much. Many Latinos still live in fear that they or a relative will be grabbed off the street, shackled and separated from their loved ones. And some in Mr. Trump's orbit make clear that they think certain Americans are more American than others. All this leaves an open goal for Democrats. They may still trip on their own bootlaces, and Mr. Trump may yet win back some popularity by, say, changing the communist regime in Cuba. But if the Democrats position themselves as the party of economic predictability rather than scattergun tariffs and self-inflicted oil shocks, and of the rule of law instead of racially tinged bullying, that should appeal not only to disillusioned Hispanics, but to Americans in general.
Leaders.
Drones versus gangs. Hope in Haiti. The most lawless state in the Americas needs order first, then elections.
Gangsters control most of Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, extorting money from civilians at every turn. Pedestrians must pay a toll to enter a gang-ruled neighbourhood. Traders must pay taxes, even on food. The result is ruin. Haitians are more likely to suffer from severe hunger than people in war-racked Sudan. Only 10% of clinics are fully operational. Some 1.4 million people have been forced to flee from their homes, about as many as were displaced by a huge earthquake in 2010. But whereas that natural disaster prompted a swift humanitarian response, Haiti's political collapse has driven donors to despair. A security mission backed by the UN has been running since 2024, but it has done little to improve public safety. Now there is hope at last. For the first time in years, the gangs are starting to retreat. In 2025, the Haitian National Police began fighting back with help from private security contractors, including Vectus Global, a firm founded by Blackwater's Eric Prince. They use small aerial kamikaze drones to hunt gangsters. Hundreds have been killed. The UN security mission is being revamped with American backing. It will soon have 5 times more personnel and an explicit mandate to go after gangsters independently. The first troops are due to arrive from Chad in April. The streets of Port-au-Prince show signs of small improvements, though few areas are yet safe. The acting Prime Minister since 2024, Alix Fils-Aimé, is in favour with the Americans and has brought a measure of stable leadership. All this gives Haiti its best chance in years to restore something resembling calm. But reviving a minimally functional state will require much more than blowing up gangsters. Haiti needs a government with a democratic mandate to rebuild the country and a muscular civilian police force that acts in Haitians' best interests. This means holding elections in which Haitians feel safe enough to vote as they wish, not as criminals with guns tell them to. It is a difficult task. Since its first tolerably free elections in 1990, Haiti has endured coups, military rule, vote rigging and brief foreign occupation. There have been no elections since 2016, when Jovenel Moïse, a failed banana farmer, won the presidency with the support of less than 10% of registered voters. Turnout was 18%, the lowest ever. Moïse was later assassinated. Haiti's Electoral Council has scheduled elections for August, but it seems unlikely the country will be ready so soon. Rather than rushing to hold a vote, the government and its international partners should try harder to improve security. The drones must be targeted and proportionate. When the new UN force arrives, it should start by protecting Haiti's main roads so that food, goods and people can move again. That would ease hunger and give the economy a chance to grow after 7 years of deep recession. The police force, which has been under civilian control only since 1995, should take the lead in consolidating any gains, working street by street to make neighbourhoods not merely gangster-free, but reasonably safe. Then Haitians deserve a choice. The gangs will undoubtedly back pliable candidates, and members of the old corrupt elite will try their luck. What Haitians really need is, if not a Mandela figure, at least a leader capable of getting the basics right, orderly streets and a non-predatory state. It is far from clear who that leader might be. Mr. Fils-Aimé cannot run. However, better security might give candidates time to emerge. Haitians, mindful of the consequences of bad leadership, should scrutinise them carefully.
Letters.
On Hungary's election, congressional districts, the Articles of Confederation, meeting rooms, food, and Donald Trump.
A threat to democracy.
From Vlad Petru-Voicu, Milan. Your assessment that Hungary's election in April will be free but not fair is, if anything, optimistic. Article, Can Viktor Orban be beaten? March 2nd. The framing of your interactive article implies that there is a limit to what Viktor Orban, the populist right Prime Minister, is prepared to do. History suggests otherwise. Fidesz, his right-wing party, has never before faced a real threat of losing power. Previous opposition coalitions were fragmented, strategically inept, and easy enough to defeat through gerrymandering and media capture alone. Peter Magyar and his centre-right Tisza party are a different type of opposition altogether. That the Orban regime has not yet resorted to active interference says less about its restraint than about the bar it has never previously had to clear. Direct interference in the election would not be a qualitative leap. The infrastructure is already in place if the regime chooses to use it. Postal vote manipulation, organised transport for voters, vote buying, and the provision of public benefits in exchange for votes in rural communities are established practices. Consider the case of Georgia in 2024. The pro-Russian Georgian Dream Party faced a consolidated opposition with a credible polling lead, had similarly captured state institutions, and escalated to credible allegations of direct fraud precisely when facing an existential threat. That is the trajectory to watch in Budapest. Mr. Magyar has played his hand close to perfection, but there is only so much any politician can do against a man who keeps an ace up his sleeve, and has never had more reason to play it.
We need more congressmen.
From Ryan Zamaripa, Adjunct Lecturer, School of Social Work, Columbia University, New York. As a former staffer in Congress, I fully agree with your analysis on why it is so hard to work there today. Article, Bleak House, February 21st. Another factor behind this is the number of constituents in congressional districts, which has risen hugely over the past century. After 1910, when the total number of seats in the House of Representatives increased to its current size of 435, each member had, on average, 212,000 constituents. Today, that figure is 760,000, but with wide variation among states, owing to a quirky apportionment process. America has one of the highest rates of constituents to representatives of any country in the world. As you rightfully noted, this means that each member's finite time is increasingly spent on the most well-resourced interests. Overturning the Permanent Apportionment Act of 1929 would not only make their lives easier, it would also ensure that voters have a greater say in what is supposed to be the more representative of the two chambers. Even a modest reduction in this ratio, say to 500,000 Americans per congressional seat, would add about 250 more elected officials to help carry the load.
America's first draft.
From Paul Schreiner, Ankeny, Iowa. Your interactive on America at 250, February 14th, didn't mention a critical piece of early American history. The Founding Fathers' first attempt to form a national government was through the Articles of Confederation, the first draft of which was presented to the Continental Congress a mere 8 days after the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Eventually ratified in 1781, the Articles created a profoundly weak central government consisting of a single unicameral legislative branch with the powers to negotiate treaties, coin money, and declare war, but explicitly lacking the powers to impose taxes, regulate interstate commerce, or draft soldiers. There was no executive office, nor any judiciary. The simultaneous crises of demands by European merchants for payment in hard currency, an economy hampered by state protectionism, and a rebellion in Massachusetts made the founders realize that governing by begging was not much of a way to run a country. The lessons played an important role in guiding the Constitution of 1787.
Our meeting is incompetent.
From Kurt Macmillan, Falls Church, Virginia. Bartleby's column on the excruciating quest for a meeting room, article February 14th, listed the names of the rooms where employees tried to hold their gathering, whether indecisive or incapable, and so on. We had difficulties once naming rooms in offices. Because we're in the Washington area, naming the spaces after the Founding Fathers was an early thought, but quickly rejected when we realized that someone needs to fix the camera in the rear of John Adams would trigger complaints. Likewise, naming rooms after First Ladies was discarded, out of a fear that Dolly Madison is hot, or worse, frigid, would become the standard quibble about room temperatures. So we went with national parks. Denali is the largest room with twin 80-inch conference screens that I've nicknamed George and Orwell.
Living well by eating well.
From Christoph Schauer, Hotel Manager, Mandarin Oriental, Vienna. The Free Exchange column on China's high household spending on food was economically neat. Article February 28th. But after living for almost a decade in Asia, I suspect the explanation is also cultural. I grew up in Germany, where food is solid and satisfying, but seldom civilizational. One respects the sausage, one does not anchor the year around it. Marrying into a Taiwanese family has been an education. In much of East Asia, food is a primary form of social organization. The range of regional cuisines alone complicates comparison. The granularity of technique, season and symbolism exceeds what most European cities can sustain at similar scale. Street food is not a concession to cost, it is civic infrastructure. Several generations prepare and eat together. The table becomes the axis of continuity. Engel's law that, as their income increases, people devote a smaller share of it to sustenance, may remain intact in spreadsheets. Culturally, however, it may be better to sit down, eat well, and revise its assumptions.
On a mission.
From Dr. Jonah Gannon, Perth, Australia. May I please request a spell check regarding Donald Trump's Board of Peace? Article The World This Week, February 21st. Are we sure he didn't spell it B-O-R-E-D?